to our PsyTech Roundtable discussion on ketamine, if you haven't guessed already. I would like to thank Ketamine Media, who is our sponsor for this evening's roundtable, and to welcome all of our attendees. Thank you so much for joining us, for the new people and for those that keep coming back. This will be an exciting and fascinating 90 minutes with this panel of experts that we have here today. I'm extremely honored to introduce Dr. Mark Braunstein. Dr. Braunstein is a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist in the plant-based medicine space, currently practicing in Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. He is the co-founder and CEO of Reconscious Medical, a ketamine-based technology and telemedicine company. And I can think of no one else that I would choose to moderate this incredible panel. So Mark, I will let you take over or continue from where we started, introducing our amazing panelists. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Deb. What an honor it is to be here today with these legends and icons in the field of ketamine and mental illness. Really excited to do this, and really excited to introduce the panelists. Let me start with Dr. Phil Wolfson. Dr. Phil is a psychiatrist, activist, and author. He's truly an icon and has been the pioneer of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and psychedelic research. He's the creator of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and the co-founder of the Ketamine Research Foundation and the Ketamine Training Center. Dr. Abid Nazeer is a board-certified psychiatrist and the chief medical officer for a national comprehensive opioid treatment program called Symetra Recovery. And the founder of Advanced Psychiatric Solutions, Ketamine Treatment Center and Integrative Mental Health Center in Chicago. Julane Andries is a psychotherapist and licensed marriage and family therapist. Her energy truly comes from the heart space, and it shows through all of her extensive work within the field. She's also the co-founder of the Ketamine Research Foundation and the Ketamine Training Center. Dr. Casey Paleos is a psychiatrist and MAPS researcher with over 10 years practice in psychedelic medicine. He's also the president and co-founder of the Nautilus Sanctuary and the chief science director at Mindbloom, as well as the lead trainer at Fluence and the medical director at Journey Clinical. And last but not least is Dr. Stephen Mandel. He's a board certified anesthesiologist and has a master's in psychology, which is a really interesting combination. He's the first president and co-founder of the American Society of Ketamine Physicians, Psychotherapists, and Practitioners, and is also president and founder of the Ketamine Clinics in Los Angeles. Welcome, everybody. I'd love if we could go ahead and have you each introduce yourselves as well. I'd love if Dr. Nazeer could start with a little bit more about himself.
Sure, thanks. Abid Nazeer. So like Mark said, I'm a psychiatrist and subspecialty in addiction medicine. I've been basically operating it's a psychiatric ketamine clinic. So it's a psychiatry clinic focused on ketamine, APS ketamine, and it's at two locations, and one in Oak Brook, it's outside of Chicago, and one in downtown Chicago. Then I spend a lot of my time being chief medical officer for Symetra Recovery, which is like a comprehensive opiate treatment program where we kind of put all services in one roof, and we dispense buprenorphine, methadone, Vivitrol in kind of a comprehensive setting. Basically born and raised in Chicago, kind of focused on getting ready for the psychedelic revolution here, and just been doing ketamine now in an IV fashion for about 4 years. Few thousand patients, and very comfortable with that route of administration, and trying to place it in the context of psychiatric overall comprehensive care.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Nazeer. I appreciate that. Julane, would you like to introduce yourself next, please?
Sure, thank you. It's good to be here. So I'm Julane Andries. I live in Marin County, and I work at the Transformational Center for Psychotherapy, where we mostly do ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. I also work with MAPS with on their phase 3 study with MDMA for PTSD. I also, before that, worked with MAPS again on an amazing phase 2 study, a small study that Phil Wolfson and I did with people with anxiety with their life-threatening illness, and used MDMA for that. And, as far as which we'll talk about later, our protocol for doing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy actually developed from working with MDMA with people with PTSD with their life-threatening illness. We were so we understood the value of if one is able to do dyadic work, and also the flow of a ketamine session. Spending time to talk, spending time to do medicine, and spending time to integrate. So it was a beautiful model for us to learn from, and we were able to adapt it to ketamine work, which we've also tried to teach. So I also a lead trainer with the Ketamine Training Center, which we started doing, I think about 2.5 years ago, which is an amazing part of the work because it's so energetic, and we've been able to take that model on the road and across the country. And our goal being to train people to be able to use ketamine with psychotherapy, to be able to learn this model rather than a pure psychiatric model. And I also do research, which I also love. I would recommend anyone who's doing a lot of intense psychotherapy work to have other outlets. So doing research for me is exciting and fun because it's groundbreaking. So I'll stop there. It's just a few of the things that I do and have done.
Thank you so much, Julane. Appreciate you being here, and is so happy to have a female on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Hey, Stephen, how do you feel about going next?
I'm fine with that, Mark. I'm really excited to be here. I'm very grateful to be here, and it's a privilege. I'm Dr. Stephen Mandel. I'm a physician, anesthesiologist. I went to graduate school in clinical psychology for 4 years, was writing my dissertation when I got the opportunity to go to medical school. And I did anesthesia for many years. And I continued my interest in mood disorders, particularly because I really was interested in mood disorders intellectually. And I had enough problems in my own family with depression and suicidality that I stayed tuned into what was going on. And when in the early part of this century, people started talking about ketamine as a reliever of depression and suicidality, and I've been using ketamine practically since the FDA approved it, I said, I got to get into this. And I happened to have a recovery room at my disposal because I was the chief anesthesiologist at a surgery center. And I had got permission to use it in the afternoon, and I started doing infusions for basically family of staff. I couldn't really believe that it would be that transformative. I couldn't believe that it would be like giving Narcan to an overdose, or giving D50 to somebody who had too much insulin. It was just not credible. But I started doing it, and I was just amazed. And I was captured. This is so phenomenal a thing to do. And what a privilege to be able to be part of really transforming lives. And it's so quick and safe and remarkably transformative that I just was all in. And at the time, this was in 2014, it was a little fringy. And I can tell you stories about that, but this is just an introduction. Anyway, I stopped doing anesthesia. Within 6 months, I had opened my clinic. I was doing this full time, had to give off and mentor somebody else to run the surgery center. And I've been doing ketamine infusions full-time. I chose IV for a lot of reasons, and I'll talk about that later if anybody's interested. And we've done like about 14,000 infusions and well over 2,000 patients. And we're a very busy clinic. We do this every day, all day. That's just all we do. And we love it. I mean, this is 7 years later and thousands of patients later and way over 10,000 infusions later. And I was in the clinic yesterday, despite COVID, and it still lights me up. It's amazing.
No, your passion and your exuberance is palpable, man. I can feel it 1,000 miles away over here. And really, that's what I love about everyone on the panel and talking to all of you beforehand. Like, everyone is so excited about this form of medicine and the transformations. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Casey Paleos.
Hey, everybody. Thank you to Mark and to PsyTech for inviting me to talk. I'm Dr. Casey Paleos. I'm a psychiatrist. Started working with psychedelic medicine while still in residency at NYU. Had the great good fortune to be in training there at the time that the psilocybin cancer anxiety study was really just starting, and got to become involved in that clinical trial as a study therapist. Absolutely changed the trajectory of my career, really united a lot of sort of passions that I had developed over the years previous to that I had no inclination could ever actually be dovetailed with my training as a physician or as a psychiatrist. But, you know, this is how the universe works sometimes, some mysterious ways. But it became clear at that point that that was definitely my calling. So I stayed on as faculty at NYU for a number of years, largely in the emergency department. Piloted a study with one of my mentors from the psilocybin trial, Steve Ross, using ketamine in the emergency department for people coming in with severe depression, suicidality, as a acute intervention en route to the inpatient psychiatric unit. And that was my first exposure to ketamine as an antidepressant. We were replicating the findings of another group at Yale that had used it in the emergency department there. And I was really kind of blown away by what we were seeing in terms of the acute antidepressant effect, and became very convinced in its utility as a tool. In about 2016, I started my private practice, and not long after that began infusing patients there using the emergency medicine protocol, which is a bolus infusion rather than the 40-minute typical anesthesia model, with excellent effect. I've done, I'm a solo practitioner, so nowhere close to 14,000, but I would say at least a few hundred infusions over the last 5 years using that model, which is kind of a hybrid between the infusion and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, insofar as it's me and the patient one-on-one in the room for 90 minutes. Bolus gets done early on in the session, and after about 5-10 minutes of dissociation, there's a nice sort of 45-minute window of, you know, what can become a really fertile psycholytic ground for talk therapy. And shortly after that, I became involved in the MAPS MDMA-assisted psychotherapy trials. Have been a principal investigator on that trial since 2017, in the phase 3 clinical trials most recently, and that is ongoing work that we're doing in New York City. I also founded with a bunch of my colleagues from that clinical trial study an organization called Nautilus Sanctuary, which is a nonprofit that is seeks to, well, we're sort of the umbrella contract holder for the phase 3 clinical trial, and we also are in the midst of getting an investigator-initiated trial using MDMA-assisted therapy for frontline healthcare workers in New York City, having been exposed to COVID. The COVID pandemic and the way it sort of hit New York City really, really hard last spring has created, as you can imagine, some pretty deep repercussions through the entire city, and particularly in the healthcare community here. So we're hoping to use MDMA-assisted therapy to address that. And yeah, just really feel really blessed and fortunate to kind of been at the right place at the right time. And it's been amazing in being involved in this work over the last 10 years to see how psychedelic medicine is really how the groundswell. I kind of anticipated this happening, but to actually see it coming to fruition has been really powerful. And it's not to say that everything is good, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but there are, definitely elements, some sharks swimming in these waters, let's say, that maybe don't quite fully get it. And I also, have felt a calling to kind of try and steward that as best I can. I know things are going to happen outside of anyone's control, but I feel as, somebody who feels very passionate about this work, and it's particularly about upholding its integrity. I feel a call towards some kind of stewardship in whatever way I can do that. And the for-profit companies that are coming to the space are going to be doing this work whether I like it or not, and whether I'm involved in it or not. And about a year and a half ago, I decided to, after a lot of soul searching, become involved with one of those companies called Mindbloom. And it's been kind of a mixed bag in some ways, but I do think we've been able to help a lot of people through that model. It's been over 1,000 patients using the model that I designed a year and a half ago, which is based on a sublingual, mostly remote treatment model. So yeah, these are very, very interesting times. And, as the ancient Chinese say, that's both a blessing and a curse. So
Casey, thank you so much, man. What an awesome intro. I love that you've already, guys have, a lot of you have already started talking about some of the questions we'll get into later, which include routes of administration and what got you into this field. And we'll get more into that later, but thank you very much for the work you do. Last but not least, Dr. Wolfson, please.
Well, I'm going to talk about strands of life at 77. It's a long way back. And there have been many that are influential in bringing me to this junction, really. So I grew up in New York, small town Queens, and went to Brandeis. And at Brandeis, they had free psychotherapy, and I, as many New Yorkers, left the city at 16, and I was happy to leave home, but I was in a full-blown identity crisis. And it was a period of it when identity crises became really prominent within the new kind of psychotherapy modalities that were emerging out of Freudianism. And I had 30 sessions for free that really taught me the power of psychotherapy. So I went to medical school also at NYU because I wanted to be a psychotherapist. And the PhDs at Brandeis said, well, you should really be fully empowered. So go to medical school. So I did. And I was just reminiscing because Martin Luther King's birthday just happened. And my senior year at college, I had the pleasure of actually introducing Martin Luther King to the audience at school, shook his hand that I've never washed since, and introduced him. We had a nascent political formation of students for human rights. And that was formative to me. So part of who I am is an activist. And I went to my first demonstration in 1965 against the war in Vietnam. And from that moment on, I left Queens and I was a citizen of the world, which is how I view myself. National boundaries, I think, are archaic and destructive. And being a citizen of the world, and in the 60s, it meant you could go anywhere, drop down anywhere. And of course, psychedelics became part of our lives. In NYU 1964, I and 8 other students had our first LSD experience. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. And it's a long story. But that changed my life, as did marijuana. And, we talk about the only legal psychedelic, but for me, marijuana has always been an auspicious psychedelic agent, an agent of change, an agent of creativity, etc. So, but I was doing psychotherapy in a variety of interesting ways around marathons and group psychotherapy. I did 3 years of group training. Groups became a very powerful, impassioned force in my life. I ran marathons, and then and all kinds of new types of strategic and therapies were of interest to me. So 1983 occurs, I meet Sasha Shulgin, and Sasha and Ann take me on a journey with MDMA, and I was running an alternative psych hospital for first break psychotic people in Contra Costa. And I could feel the revolution of MDMA as a psychotherapeutic agent and began to employ it. And we formed a group called ARUPA, the Association for Responsible Use of Psychedelic Agents, out of which most of the folks that we still see, the senior folks in this world, emerge. Rick Doblin, George Greer, Dave Nichols, on and on and on, Andy Weil, Claudio Naranjo, and we had a group, and the group was expansive, and we had all substances available. LSD had dropped out, and we were doing psychotherapy in the most marvelous ways, and in some ways, because of oppression, suppression, repression of that movement, here we are emerging again. But if you can imagine for a second, had that continued with legal work, that we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would have had this conversation in 1986, right, when it became illegal, and we tried to keep it legal desperately. So we're in a kind of recovery period, and it's strange, and it's a bit, crunchy and twisted because of the emergence from illegality into now clinical work. But before that, we were doing clinical work, but we didn't have to suppress our clinical work. We weren't under that kind of control. And the aliveness and the vivacity and the exploration that occurred within that freedom was enormous. And if you just look at the economics of it, an MDMA session was $300 to $500 in that period for couples with, working for 5-6 hours at a time. So the whole thing was strangulated by Nixon and the whole illegalization. So here we are again. I'm grateful to be out in the open. I've been out in the open for quite a while, and the ketamine work that we do is profound. We had ketamine back in the 1980s. We didn't know much about it. Jansen wrote about people doing ketamine, and Roquette came to Maryland Psychiatric and brought ketamine with him, and that was all the 80s. But the principal drugs were the ones that were moving into legality, as well as ayahuasca. We learned of ayahuasca in 1985. We learned of 5-MeO in 1985. So the repression of all of that is part of the crucible in which we are emerging, and happy to bring back into the light the power of these agents as psychotherapeutic tools, because I don't see them as drugs. We do them as drugs all the time. Almost all of us got here by doing things that were not prescribed, but were part of our lives and part of our culture. But here we are doing them as drugs. And there is this kind of contortion between the two streams of the underground, or what people call recreational, I don't like that word, and the clinical. And I think that's part of what we're going to be talking about today, because it frames the dialogue. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Phil. Thanks, everybody. Let's jump into the questions here, okay? Phil, when did you start using ketamine again?
1990.
As a psychotherapeutic agent?
I had my first personal experience
Right.
in 1990, which was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. And then as actually using it in treatment, I stopped. I had 10 years where I didn't use it because I thought it was such a complete, extraordinary experience. I had never been completely dissolved in the way that ketamine did, and experiencing it myself as an energetic form. And I just lost my oldest son to leukemia, and that was an ordeal of 4 years duration, which also enters into who I am in a deep way. And I felt it was complete. So then I went 10 years, and then in 2000 or so, 1999, with Ralph Metzner, et cetera, we began using ketamine again, and psychotherapeutically, very sotto voce. And then 5-6 years ago, fully on board with it.
So about 20 years then, it sounds like.
Well, aware.
20, 30.
Yeah.
And Casey, how about you? Did you say 2014? Was when you started
we did the clinical
prescribing
trial.
ketamine?
I didn't start prescribing until 2016. Steve and I did the clinical trial in 2013, 2014.
And what was that for?
That was using ketamine, bolus IV ketamine in depressed and suicidal patients in the emergency department at Bellevue and NYU.
Thank you. And Stephen, you started practicing with it in 2014, you said, right?
Depends on how you want to count. I started using ketamine in 1971, but I didn't use it for mood disorders until 2013, and I didn't actively start my practice until 2014. Ketamine was approved as an anesthetic in 1970. And for decades, it was literally the most widely used anesthetic on earth. That's one of the things that distinguishes it from so many of the other synthesized chemicals and botanicals that we work with. We really know a lot about this particular chemical. The others have great promise, but very thin databases. Ketamine has a database that's literally hundreds of millions or billions deep.
Huge. And you know, that's when we think about, a lot of people don't know that ketamine is a psychedelic. And so some education on that. And then as far as psychedelics, you're right, that recorded medical history of so many patients having used it through anesthesia gives us a huge database. You're right.
Mark, I think we have to talk about ketamine as having psychedelic properties rather than being a psychedelic. I think that's important to the conversation. Well, I think it's important to the conversation. Ketamine's an anesthetic, and part of our confusion comes because it's been used as an anesthetic, now Spravato, but off-label is how we use it because of its psychedelic properties. And the debate has been whether those are important to us in terms of treatment outcomes, or whether they're adventitial and they should be disregarded and not used and not related to. So I think that really, frames the discussion.
Phil, I think it's a different...
So I'd love to jump into that actually and talk about that, because what are we doing to show that are the psychedelic properties of ketamine more effective than ketamine used for mood disorders in non-psychedelic manner, right? I think this gets into our question of IV versus IM versus lozenge versus doing it with psychotherapy or without psychotherapy.
This is what makes ketamine such a fascinating and versatile tool, is because it has a number of different effects along the spectrum of dosage, from low dose up to higher dose that range. I mean, Phil in his great paper from last year, 2019 rather, describes it as trance and transformation. So at the low dose psycholytic, you're kind of getting people into a trance type of state, which is loosening up ego defenses and kind of lubricating the psychotherapeutic process, let's say, and actually allowing unconscious material that might be otherwise inaccessible to come to conscious awareness so that it can be worked with in therapy. But then at the higher doses, and particularly using intramuscular or intravenous routes, you will get much more of a transformative psychedelic type of experience. And there's researchers, Evgeny Krupitsky from the Soviet Union, Russia, pioneered this work in the 80s, doing high dose 2 to 2.5 milligram per kilogram intramuscular injections with alcoholics and people with heroin addiction, with tremendous results. As Dr. Wolfson mentioned, Salvador Roquette back in the 70s was using ketamine as a psychedelic, certainly in a cocktail of a sort of very complex protocol that he was using that involved LSD and datura and psilocybin mushrooms and all kinds of things in Mexico. So ketamine has this really wide, I think, spectrum of effects, and by extension, spectrum of psychotherapeutic and just more. So there's like a psychotherapeutic. Certainly a psychotherapeutic model which uses ketamine both in its trance and transformative states, but then there's a more straight pharmacologic model where
Casey, I'm sorry, what do you prefer? Which model do you prefer? What do you find most effective?
Well, I mean, my philosophy in general is to try and meet patients where they're at. I'm not trying to impose a lot of preconceived notions, and I have some patients that come into my practice who aren't very psychologically minded, who don't really want to do a lot of talk therapy. And, initially I was like, well, is this going to help these patients? Why am I doing this? But, sort of in spite of themselves, I think, and because of the very unique sort of neurophysiologic effects that ketamine induces, they get better whether or not they want to engage in psychotherapy with me. Now, that's not to say that I think, and I certainly believe that ketamine combined with psychotherapy actually enhances outcomes for sure. But in and of itself, because of the effects that it has on enhancing neuroplasticity and in sort of suppressing the default mode network and enhancing things like the salience and central executive network, that sort of triple network of depression that is the NIMH is doing a lot of research on lately, because of its effect on essentially brain function. As long as a person's not going in between their sessions with me, getting infusions, as long as they're not going back into an environment that's actively re-traumatizing them, they're going to get some improvement, sometimes profound levels of improvement.
So it sounds like what you think is best for the patient using ketamine kind of depends upon who the patient is. You don't have
100%. Yes.
Dr. Nazeer, how about yourself? Do you have a favorite modality of using ketamine?
Yeah, I mean, favorite modality for sure, and for me has been IV. I mean, IV, I feel it has a lot of versatility in terms of, there's like a wide range of patients who need this treatment, right? So we're talking, some people are, just not there when it comes to their ability to make the dissociative experience, useful in a way. So I think there's a journey that all ketamine practitioners kind of go on. Where when I started, I was very set on a lot of stuff that Casey was talking about in terms of the biology and the neurophysiology and what's happening with ketamine. There are patients who were improving, who weren't dissociating too much. There were people who dissociated more who didn't improve. I mean, it was a mix. I couldn't really pinpoint how important the dissociative part was. So I kind of practice this medical approach, but it's almost like a hybrid where when we start the infusion course, if somebody's not responding, and they're kind of anxious about the dissociative experience, that's where we put a lot of work in to get them comfortable with increasing the dose and adding more of a therapy component to it. So I think every person's different. Some people are like, I need to dissociate. I didn't dissociate as much as I needed to on that infusion. I didn't get enough benefit. They come back and then we're going up on the dose. So every person's different to approach it, what makes them comfortable. If I go too high on a dose immediately to some patients, and we've infused as high as 80, 90 years old. So some people are just afraid of it initially. So if I went too strong immediately, it's going to turn them off to the treatment overall. They might decide, this is too much. They got panicky. And then you have to kind of dial it back down. So for me, it's a lot easier to start low and kind of increase that dissociative experience as time goes on, especially if their improvement plateaus. Usually there could be a slight improvement and then somewhat of a kind of a plateau there or a dip. And the next thing to do really is start bringing them along into that more intense dissociative experience. And the longer I do it, the more fixed belief I have that you will get a better benefit when you mix a higher dissociative experience with therapy combined. That's probably going to give you the best chance of a longer lasting benefit. But there are some people who could sit there at 0.5, 0.6 milligrams per kilogram, and their PHQ-9 drops dramatically, and that's kind of where they hover, and they've
Awesome.
been doing great.
Thank you. You know, I'm curious about that necessity of the dissociative experience. Julane, what do you think about that?
She seems to be off the line. I don't know why. We're in the same house. I'm not sure. So maybe I'll try for that, and then she'll come in.
Phil,
may I go for
I
that?
want you to try for that. And then I also want you to talk about why you do IM and not IV.
Sure.
Thanks.
I think the whole thing of route of administration is specious. Ketamine depends on two things: the speed in which you get it in and how much you get it in. And it's all about absorption. So whether you do IV, Julane's coming back on, I'll just finish this. Whether you do IV or you do IM, these are issues of convenience, of location and comfort. We do it in office. We have always argued that the medicalization of ketamine is not necessary and uncomfortable, though Mandel does it with hundreds and thousands of people. But if Mandel added psychotherapy to it and a process where people could have time to talk about their experience, I would see no great difference between what he was doing and what we were doing. So I don't think the route of administration is crucial to anything.
I want to comment when you're finished, though.
And so that's one of the aspects of it. I think that's to be put aside, really.
No,
And Julane, you were back on. There was a question for you.
Okay, sorry, I've lost my computer. I'm trying to get it back, but I'm on my phone now. So
okay.
Can you tell me the question, Mark?
Yeah. We were talking about the importance of the dissociative state with ketamine.
I'm sorry, the importance of what?
What is the importance of the dissociative state, Julane?
Okay, right. And yeah, your original question, do you have to go into that state to have benefit? You know, it's interesting because our clients and patients are much more knowledgeable than they were a few years ago, especially at the beginning of this work, where we really we had to educate them from step one. But I just had a woman yesterday ask me that same question. So it really is important that we know. And I agree with some of the other speakers that ketamine works. That's why it's such a beautiful, amazing medicine. It works on its own by itself, and it works much better with psychotherapy. I've had countless people come in who've had ketamine without psychotherapy, and almost every one of them would describe it as a missed opportunity, so that people do get better in a deeper and maybe more prolonged way with psychotherapy, I believe. But so the importance of the state, we one of the things that I think Phil and I and many people we've trained, what we believe in is that the practitioner, it's really important, we feel, for the practitioner to understand the different states of ketamine. So, and that includes from the psycholytic low dose, softened state that people go into, to the dissociative state. So we know it intimately, not that we use ketamine all the time, but we use it, especially if we're changing or experimenting with a protocol, we use it in any of the ways that we might prescribe for our clients and patients. And I do find there's value in that state. Sometimes we wait a while because clients are anxious, they're afraid to let go into that place. And this is something I reminded this woman yesterday, that it's the letting go. When so many people, along with their depression and anxiety, have such a hard time and so much fear around letting go of control, letting themselves go, afraid of, I think somebody wrote yesterday in our ketamine group, of that dark space. They're afraid of it. And yet once they encounter it, it not only erases the fear of the ego dissolution space, but it also gives them practice in fear and ordinary mind, ordinary life, and letting go and confronting and understanding what is underneath anxiety, what is underneath depression. So I absolutely think that it's important. One doesn't have to do it, but I think it really does help so many people go further. And, in maybe the trite phrase, but it's absolutely true, of stretching the mind, of realizing there's more to mind than what we do every day. And being curious and interested, it really facilitates that, being interested in what their mind is about, and maybe that expansion of mind, what else is possible. I could go on for hours about some of this, but I just wanted to in a forceful way just say how important it can be.
Thanks, Julane. I think when you talk about ketamine being more effective with psychotherapy, as a psychiatrist, I just think about how with every medication, Prozac is more effective with psychotherapy, lithium is more effective with psychotherapy. So psychotherapy does, I think, enhance the efficacy of any medication we use. Unfortunately, so much of modern psychiatry has gone towards this biological focus without the focus on psychotherapy.
Right. So if somebody, and I won't take up too much room here, but if one of your patients is going into an ego dissolution or a deep space, and they may have a visionary experience, it's much like doing dream work sometimes, that what came to them or their feeling around what they experienced in a session, if there is no one to talk to about that, no one to process it with, no one to be curious along with them as to what the experience was like, whether it's a difficult one or a positive one, it's not that they won't grow from it, but without that partner to process it, it's again, it's a lost place.
Thank you. No, that makes me think of two questions I'd like to ask Stephen. One is, what does he think about what Julane just said? When patients have these visionary experiences, with your background as a psychologist, what do you think about, with your practice? Do they have a way to process that, Stephen? Or do you not think they need to?
Some patients have a way to process it, some of them don't. As you pointed out, life goes better with psychotherapy, with or without ketamine. There's no evidence at all that psychotherapy substantially enhances the benefits of ketamine. But certainly both of them are better than, no, I love psychotherapy. All of my patients who I can get into psychotherapy, all of them are in psychotherapy, including my arranging therapists for them and urging them to go. And my patients who are lozenges, who I have ongoing relationships with, I make sure they stay with their therapist. I am very biased in favor of psychotherapy. There is no empirical evidence that it makes a difference in the outcome of ketamine treatment. That doesn't mean it doesn't make a difference, but that has not been demonstrated.
We need to
Number
do
one.
that.
Number two, route of administration.
We did publish a paper on that, Stephen.
We actually do have outcomes.
There is
empirical evidence even from.
There is a paper.
Hold on, guys.
There is a paper.
Guys, hold on.
I wanted to talk to
guys,
route of administration because it's super important.
Thank you.
And it's just not true that route of administration doesn't matter or is arbitrary or is a matter of convenience. What you do ends up influencing what you get. there are many communities involved in ketamine. One of the big ones is anesthesia. Another big one is a community that is either hedonistic or seeking self-medication. The community that we loosely call abusive. I think they're self-medicators. They love intranasal. That's their route of choice. The anesthesiologists like IV. The therapeutic people are divided. But if you'll think about the kinetics of ketamine, when you give ketamine episodically, whether you give it in the nose, in the mouth, in a muscle, you put in a depot, and there's a very abrupt rise time, like a rocket taking off. And then there's a rapid decay. The only way to stay at altitude for any length of time is with an ongoing administration. And that can be IV. There are other ways, but IV is the way that you can really just very fine tune the blood level and thus the brain level over time. I was in one of my earliest presentations at Cairo in 2017, I advocated for longer infusions and for escalating doses during the infusion. And my results are better than the literature. In my clinic, 83% benefit. In the literature, it's 71%. And I'm not magic. I'm giving a little bit longer infusion, and I'm adjusting the dose to the sweet spot. Well, what's the sweet spot? The sweet spot is a moderate degree of dissociation. And I've observed that is highly correlated with coarse horizontal nystagmus, which I also reported. And coarse horizontal nystagmus is the sweet spot. And if you give too little or too much, that goes away. Now, obviously, dissociation is not necessary to benefit from ketamine. Ketamine was discovered as a good medicine for mood disorders in the 90s by people who had had general anesthesia and were obliterated. They were really in the K-hole, and yet they emerged with great relief from their PTSD. Krupitsky in Moscow in the 80s was doing opiates and alcohol and really blitzing these people. And he had fabulous results.
I'm going to cut you off here because I want to transition into a great question. I was looking at the chat, and Veronica Gold, an esteemed colleague, brings up the point of route of administration. What about set and setting? So I just want to ask each of you, in your opinion, what's more important, route of administration or set and setting? Quick
What's
answer,
more important,
Steve.
your hands or your feet? Come on. Set and setting is crucial. So is route of administration.
But if you had...
If I could take 2 minutes to respond. First
1
of all,
minute.
What? Yeah, 1 minute. The key issue.
1 minute.
Okay, I'll stop. Can I? The fine tuning of ketamine can be done with sublingual or with intramuscular. Number one. Number two, the issue of dissociation is a red herring too. It is time out from ordinary consciousness. That's the key factor. So whether people hallucinate or not is not the question. The question is, do you have a timeout from your ordinary state enough so that you can move on to another state? And if you don't have that timeout, then you don't have an effect. And timeout is related to a dosage, but it's also a necessity, and it is the key thing psychologically, whether we don't see neuroplasticity, we don't see neurotransmitters, we do see clinical effects, and that's what we're looking at.
Briefly to your question, of course, set and setting matter. I do have to take my hat off to Michael Pollan. We have, and I don't know about the rest of the panel, but so many of our clients after that book came out and people started reading it, absolutely naive, drug naive, had, maybe experimented with something 30 years ago when they were in school. But we've had the chance to, we've incorporated in our clinic, each room it's very thoughtful about set and setting. And I teach people that when I have a client, and I remind them throughout their course of therapy, because we also prescribe sublingual lozenges and are monitoring for people to use at home when they come into the office. So we teach them about set and setting, about setting, that they have to have a safe place, a safe environment, a comfortable environment, a cocoon, as you will. And set, we teach them about what set is, which is mindset, what you're bringing to the session, what you're bringing to your own processing and work over time, what you want from that session. So every time I do a client, no matter how many times they've been in, it's always something that's either spoken or unspoken, but it's there. I teach them by showing that this is what set and setting is. And people take it home.
Can I ask a question of Steve for a second? So Steve, I'm really impressed and thank you, Julane. That was very well put and important. Just getting back a second to Steve's, the figure you quoted, 83%, is impressive. And yes, in the literature, when they're using the NIMH model, without any type of psychotherapy whatsoever, they're getting results of 71% response. But you also said that you are actively promoting psychotherapy with as many patients as you can. So how do you know that's not what's pushing your efficacy rates up, rather than the length or duration of ketamine exposure and so forth?
Casey, I have lots of thoughts, I have lots of opinions, I have lots of observations. I have no empirical evidence. There are so many variables that I'm offering you an opinion. I don't have data that proves, because I don't have a group that does psychotherapy and a group that doesn't. I have people that range from 9 years old to 88 years old. Yeah. I have people who are coming in for brain damage. I have people coming in for eating disorders. I have people coming in for substance abuse. And I have people who are coming in for PTSD. And I have people coming in for depression. And I have people who are coming in because they're suicidal.
Right.
And they're all different. And one size doesn't fit all.
No, of course not.
But I'm giving you an opinion, but certainly I am not meaning to discourage psychotherapy. I'm just telling the truth. There's no data. It doesn't mean it isn't so. That means we don't have evidence. Well, similarly, all of the research in ketamine, and I say all, more than 90%, way more, has been done with intravenous administration. Now, we all know that other routes of administration produce very, very desirable effects. We're not competing here. It's not you're right or I'm right.
No, not at all.
Plenty of room for all of us.
You guys, can I say something? What I've noticed from speaking to all the panelists, and also all the different ketamine physicians I've run across, is we all have great luck with this medication. Whether we use it PO, IM, IV, intranasal, we are all amazed and passionate about how well this medicine works. There are nuances, right? And we all do agree that it's probably best with psychotherapy. I know we've been dancing around this a bit. I do want to address, can someone please speak to the research that is out there about ketamine and psychotherapy?
Sure. We published a paper of 235 subjects from 3 clinical sites using ketamine-assisted psychotherapy last year. We're accumulating the same data. The problem is we don't have enough information using the MEQ and other things. There's several papers that have been published on just that by the Crystal Charney group, showing the benefits of dissociative states. But the psychotherapy movement is young, and we need to bring together more data. We're doing that through our Ketamine Psychotherapy Associates group. We have a study, ongoing study, a clinical study of the effects of psychedelic experiences, altered state experiences with psychotherapy in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. There's one real study, which is ours, and it's because it's in its infancy. So we'll have more. We're working on it.
And I just wanted to add to that, Phil, for the audience, the importance of research for any clinic or physician to really track their outcomes, meaning baseline measures and ongoing measures, and keep that data so that you have something to point to. And the research that we're doing that Phil is talking about, it's not just coming from our clinic, it's coming from data from many ketamine practitioners. And so that will certainly make it richer and more credible.
You know, I want to add that there's probably if you really look at everybody has a different need, and there are patients who need treatment. So route of administration can matter. There are some people who cannot get on that rocket ship. Then there are people who absolutely need to be in that middle moderate dissociative state. And there are people who just will drop out of treatment with the dissociation. It makes them too anxious. So looking at that is you really got to tailor it to the person. Because if you look at psychotherapy, of course, psychotherapy will always help. But is it psychotherapy during the actual session of administering ketamine? Some patients, they just can't. They don't want anybody. They want to go inwards. They want the light. They want to go on their own journey, and they try to self-process. Some people really just try to stay calm and relaxed through that experience, and find it difficult to even try processing anything in that state. So they just need to kind of get through it in a more of a relaxed state. So if we look at I push really hard to make sure that psychotherapy, is happening in between treatments, and that, or 2-3 hours later in the evening, maybe the next day, but during the actual treatment itself, for some people it's crucial, and some people it's almost impossible to work it out when we're looking at like a moderately dissociated state, IV form, with that smoother kind of plasma level where you get them to a point, it's the rocket ship part, the IM. It's like there's utility in that, but for some people, because this is a broad range of people we're treating here, and some people really can't get on that ship, and some people have a hard time even with the lower dose lytic therapy. I know, Mark, you and I were talking, you could even use IV in a versatile fashion by taking a lower dose of ketamine, making the drip even longer, and bringing the level of intensity down and dissociation down, so you can, basically then administer ketamine with psychotherapy at the same time, and it's something tolerated and beneficial.
Thank you. I didn't want to hog, but I just had to jump in on that one. So, we've been doing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy full time, probably since 2015, or part time, and then full time 2016. Many thousands of sessions in our office, and I could probably count on one hand people who wanted no psychotherapy. I know there are those people there, and it's good for us to say it to the audience at large, but most people we use the medicine, but we also talk before we ever start medicine, often for an hour. That's psychotherapy. We don't talk a lot during an administration of medicine because we want them to travel, to go into their own space. And we talk and integrate when they come out. And some people don't remember, they're tired, it's hard for them to talk, but most people want it. And I'm just not, and we have a whole range of, incredibly treatment resistant depression, people who've failed every medication, to more frontline people who are coming early in their illness. And I just don't find that.
I mean,
they don't want psychotherapy.
But I agree that before and after, yes, but like you said, during the actual administration, when they are going into that dissociative state and experiencing it, that's where some people will differ. But I agree that the concept of prepping, integrating therapy before, after, but through the actual whole session, some people do great with that. Some people don't.
Well, I agree. Most people don't do much talking during major parts of ego dissolution. We don't want them to. So our sessions tend to run 3 hours. I want to introduce one other term, and that's meditation. So we view this experience as an enhancement of meditative states and as a meditative state in and of itself. And I refer you to Elias Dakwar's work at Columbia PNS for the introduction of mindfulness into treatment of alcoholism and opiate addiction, and wonderful work in terms of supporting the kind of meditative stability that people can come to. And psychedelics tend to enhance a meditative process, a non-attached process. And I think we need to think about this as an important element in why people get better.
Well, ketamine is a treatment, not a cure. And it isn't a good standalone. Now, I think Mark pointed out that life goes better with psychotherapy. Everything goes better with psychotherapy. But also, if you're going to treat people with ketamine who are depressed, suicidal, have PTSD, it's not a standalone and it's not a cure. You need to look at their sleep. You need to look at their nutrition. You need to look at their exercise. You need to look at them having an intimate, interpersonal relationship. Doesn't have to be carnal, but intimate with a peer. And you have to look at psychotherapy. They all are enhancing. They all are mutually reinforcing. They all cement the enormous changes in choices that people are having to make if they want to sustain the transformation we're able to provide.
So overall, what I'm hearing from all of you is the need for individualized treatment, and also the clear need for further research into whether there's increased efficacy when ketamine is combined with therapy. Okay, I think we all agree on that. Let's move on to another question. I'm curious what pitfalls you all see in the current practice of ketamine, and kind of what we need to watch out for moving forward. Stephen, I'm curious what you think are the biggest dangers or pitfalls in current treatment.
In my farewell address as the first president of the American Society of Ketamine Physicians, Psychotherapists, and Practitioners, I said, be careful what you wish for. Because 3 years earlier, I had been so zealous about, oh, let's get this all over everywhere. Let's have ketamine on every corner. And you got to be careful what you wish for, because we have more ketamine providers than we have people who are caring and passionate and high integrity. And that's a problem. The pitfalls are people who are doing this. It sounds so woo-woo to say for the wrong reasons, but people who are not putting their patients first, who are attached to a model, whether it's IM or IN or sublingual or IV, or they're attached to making a lot of money, or they're attached to a particular therapeutic construct. Mark, you're muted.
Thank you, Steve. I think those concerns of unscrupulous people getting into this business as a way to make money, that's something we're all concerned about. Casey, I'm curious what your biggest concern in the industry is right now that you see.
I mean, that's a concern for me. People who are, I think getting into the wrong reasons doesn't sound woo. I think that's a succinct way of putting it. Some people are getting into this for the wrong reasons, and that is a problem because they're not putting patients first. But another thing that's more recently come to my attention is, because these treatments remain, they're not covered by insurance, by and large, it's still very expensive and not very accessible treatment to a lot of people. I've heard, these are anecdotal reports, but there are many, many people in certain parts of the country who are getting ketamine on the black market and treating themselves because they've heard so many great things about how safe it is and the promise of it, and frankly, getting addicted and engaging in addictive behaviors and dying from them. setting aside, getting ketamine on the black market, there's been fentanyl found in some ketamine that people have overdosed on, and that's horrible. But also this idea of, using the medicinal or therapeutic properties of a drug like ketamine that has psychedelic properties. I agree with Dr. Wolfson, it's not a psychedelic, but it does have psychedelic properties. And using that as kind of a screen or a rationalization, a way to basically justify in one's own mind and to one's loved ones that I'm actually helping myself by using ketamine every single day in high doses. I mean, I think back to, there's a story, Marsha Moore, I don't know how many people here remember her story, but she was a famous yoga teacher and sort of new age person in the late 60s, early 70s, married an anesthesiologist, wrote a book about how great ketamine is, called herself the priestess of the goddess ketamine, and was giving talks about it, and ended up becoming completely addicted and overdosing. And her skeleton was found, after 2 years missing, because she had gone into the forest and overdosed on ketamine. I mean, it's not a panacea, number one, and it's also not benign if it's used in the wrong way. It can be really dangerous.
So, yeah, people definitely abuse ketamine. It's definitely a recreational street drug with a dark side to what all the beauty and light that we've been talking
And
about.
I'm the last person, I'm not a just say no guy. I think that, the war on drugs, the Controlled Substances Act has been a total disaster for public health and for our culture and our society. But, so I'm not saying we should prohibit all drugs and only use them in medical context, but I am saying that, the sheen and like the luster of ketamine as a medicine has, I think, made it seductive in a way that it wasn't before, and has created a pitfall for people to fall into.
And, and I think if we focus on things as being medicines, not drugs, right? And having respect for all substances, that will go a long way. Dr. Nazeer, what do you see as the biggest pitfalls right now?
I mean, I guess to piggyback off of Dr. Paleos' comments, then when we look at the concept that, ketamine can have negative impact if you are using it excessively, regularly. I mean, we do see that there are ketamine use disorders, but really the point I'm trying to bring up is that where does the role of the physician or practitioner fit in basically supporting this problem? And it is not all about, I guess, the illicit ketamine. It's the concept that there are a lot more providers for ketamine now. Are they equipped to handle a patient who's suicidal, who this is their last resort? They sit down and they start the initial eval with the statement like, I've tried everything. If this doesn't work, I'm gonna end my life. And that's how we're starting. Now that is a serious situation where it requires intense monitoring afterwards, managing expectations through the whole course, that there are highs and lows in people's expectation through an entire course of ketamine treatment. So that's one thing, is to not just administer and have no kind of knowledge and expertise in handling a severely ill psychiatric patient. A, B, the screening processes are minimal in a lot of places, and maybe there are places where they just don't have any focus at all on mental health. So it's really more about just administering the med, where, is somebody there for, do they have a history of ketamine abuse? Are they doing something in terms of making the treatment potentially mute by having a lot of negative behaviors that need to be addressed through psychotherapy? Are you screening well, like for personality disorders, and then managing that through treatment as well? I mean, there's like a lot of nuances in treating people. So if you just administer, and if it doesn't work, say bye, thank you, and that's it. Our job is done. We gave you ketamine, it didn't work, and it does not work for everybody. I mean, we know it doesn't have 100% success rate. So that's the part that worries me the most. I feel there's probably going to be some kind of correction to this in the future as time goes on here, where, and unfortunately it might be linked to bad outcomes, where somebody might end up and it has happened, where people have taken their lives out of failed expectations from the treatment. It didn't work, and then where are they left?
So let's talk about that backlash for a minute, and what we can do to take responsibility to avoid that as much as possible. so that these medications can continue to be available to people, and that we can kind of set the paradigm for when the other psychedelics come out, right?
The evaluation and
what's
screening is probably crucial. So if you're going to do, if you're going to offer the service and you don't have, you have no mental health professional on staff, you don't have, or even at least available to do, there should be a psychiatric screening, I think, for any patient kind of going through this process that, we're looking at, for mania and the chance of it precipitating it, or undiagnosed or misdiagnosis of a psychotic disorder. There could be a million things. So I think it needs to have an appropriate screening process by somebody who is specialized in treating mental illness. I think that's crucial. And if we just avoid it, if we just say, you should have a psychiatrist that you should see and recommend it, but still give the treatment. I've had many patients who would sometimes come and they've gotten an infusion, they've gotten treatment, and then they maybe switch over. Let's say come to my practice and they're on methadone. It was never even screened. They have something like, there's nothing that was addressed in their initial screening at the other place, and it's like, when is too much? When is ketamine? When do you want to roll back how frequently you give it? Sometimes people will say, well, if you just finish your infusion course, come this interval and that's it, or come when just anytime you need it. And then when is it too much? If somebody's coming, every week, let's say, and we're not extending that maintenance interval out, something else has to be looked at.
So we don't want to create dependence with ketamine the way we've created dependence with Adderall and Xanax and other drugs over the years, right? We're trying to do something different with ketamine. So I don't know how we can somehow police ourselves so that we're not encouraging misuse of ketamine, because unfortunately there's a profitability in encouraging misuse as physicians, and I think that there's profitability in lack of proper screening and not having physicians present during treatments, right? So we have to address all of those things.
Can I add to that for a second? I think
Julane went first.
Oh, well, go ahead, Julane.
Thank you. Thanks. I just a wonderful discussion, and to avoid pitfalls, I think one thing that's really important that I think as I look at some of the names, many people out in the audience have, but it's being properly trained. It's understanding, at least being trained in someone's model, and practitioners will create their own. But for everything from screening to intake to first session to patient education, so for a practitioner to be trained to understand what a ketamine experience is like, the types of people that you're going to accept in your practice, are you the best one with some of the descriptions that have just been said? Somebody who's extremely suicidal, who's extremely TRD, extremely OCD, people who are at risk on lots of other medications. Do you have the experience and know how to treat those people? At our practice, we do. And the way we do intakes is usually with two providers, a psychotherapist and a physician, and then a discussion, so that we understand as much as we can all aspects. So I think training is important, and also being somewhat humble. Sometimes we get people in our practice who another wonderful, very esteemed practices has declined because they don't have the experience, nor maybe during COVID the wherewithal to handle people who are acute. We're comfortable with that, but some practices aren't. And to be able to say, no, you're not a good fit for us, is it's important to be able to say that to a client. So that's just one thing I wanted to bring up.
I think what Julane said is really important and very hard for some of us is to maintain our own humility and know where we end. Dr. Abid pointed out, everybody needs to be screened. There's a question in my mind is whether they need to be screened in-house or not, or simultaneous with their intake or not. But of course, everyone needs to be screened, and everyone needs to know, just because you are able to provide this medicine, it doesn't mean you automatically have the skills to provide it. And it's incumbent upon you to know where you end and seek consultation. Very few people know the medical and the psychological side. Unless you've studied both, you need to collaborate with someone. That's just so transparently obvious. I don't understand how this field is so divided that way, because it's impossible to do both well for most folks. We need to do this.
I love it. Stephen, I'm wondering what you would recommend to your fellow anesthesiologists about that collaboration that are getting into this field. What advice do you have them on who to collaborate with? For training or for working with, what would you recommend?
Well, collaboration can certainly be, there are many models of collaboration. You can have someone in the office next to you. You can have someone at the end of a telephone, blah, blah, blah. But you definitely, an anesthesiologist definitely needs a psychiatrist / psychologist, you know, in an optimum ideal world, both. And it's really nice to have a skilled psychiatric nurse as well. It depends. If you're putting the patient first, what skills do you have? And what skills are still missing that might enhance this patient's experience? Maybe you need someone who does the MDR. Maybe you need a nutritionist. But the point is to stay heads up, to look at what the patient needs and to bring it in. If you don't have it yourself, there's no shame in that, but there's a big shame in not making it possible, not noticing the missing and addressing it as best you can to correct it.
Thanks, Steve.
Can I say one word?
Yeah, please, Phil.
I think this is a good conversation and an important one. We have a very desirable product process, and it's going to be more enhanced as other psychedelic medicines come on board. And there are people who are attracted to it out of the hype or Michael Pollan's book, and there are people attracted to it because they want a journey or have a trip. And there are people who are suffering grievously who come to us off the street, who are naive, who have no experience, and many of whom have deep emotional problems. The problem of the commercialization is the expansion in vast ways without trained personnel, as we've been talking. It's not just psychiatric, it's just about how to deal with human beings in all their complexity. We open the door to people and they walk in, they're not just a garden variety treatment-resistant depression. They come with families, with cultures, with long histories, with violence and trauma. And so we're opening the door to, as Stephen was saying, to develop a full spectrum of approach to human beings. And so when we reduce it down and we look more at the money aspect and how to make money from clinics, because it's a wonderful time to make money. Ketamine is really big in the world. Let's make money. And it pours into it. We're also expanding with people who have really very little experience in how to treat human beings. And as Stephen said earlier, it's not a standalone drug. There's a complexity to the world of treating people who are coming in with various forms of suffering. And we have to be modest in terms of our ability to do that. Ketamine doesn't work for everyone. We have treatment failures. We have certain populations that are harder to treat for all of us, like people with severe compulsive disorders, very hard to treat, with, terrible histories of trauma. So I think we need to come together as a community of people treating human beings in the depth of who they are, and that we're all involved in learning more, including myself, about how to do this work with people and the specific embrace of the medicines with methodologies that are appropriate to them. So that's my spiel.
So the need for creating community. I mean, it, amongst ourselves sounds really important for the furthering of this movement and getting this medicine out there correctly. I'm curious what else you guys think is important to do right now for paving the future of psychedelic treatment. Casey?
Not get into wars with one another about who's right and who does it best. That will only serve the many, many, many forces who are arrayed against the progression of this medicine and the progression of psychedelics into treatment.
Mm-hmm.
The more we war, the more we dump on one another, we are just giving aid to those who would like to squish this and who actively want to squish it. No kidding, I'm not paranoid. So if you really want to be an enemy of ketamine, just point to your brother and say he does it wrong.
I think humility in this, and I think in all human endeavors is crucial, but in this particularly, having humility in the face of what we still don't understand, having tolerance for other people's viewpoints, I mean, I think is totally crucial. And I also just want to, I posted this in the chat just now, but Dr. Raquel Bennett and Dr. Wes Ryan recently published a paper in the Journal for Psychedelic Medicine called The Ethical Guidelines for Ketamine Clinicians. Sorry, Journal of Psychedelic Psychiatry. I posted a link to the paper, but so it addresses a lot of what Dr. Mandel spoke about earlier in terms of really enhancing a multidisciplinary approach and making sure that patients are treated as whole people, not just brains in a jar.
I want to say that the American Society of Ketamine Physicians, Psychotherapists, and Practitioners has a much more elaborate and nuanced ethical statement as well, which was published well prior to Dr. Bennett's.
Yeah,
but I want to say, can I just throw in one thing? We don't know where this drug goes. We don't know what this drug does. Just to throw something in, two somethings very quickly. In China, in 2019, Ma published a study where half of 650 odd women got an IM injection of 0.5 milligram per kilogram on the delivery table while they were having their C-sections. The women who got the ketamine had half the suicide rate in their first post-delivery year of the people who did that. No other interventions whatsoever. But I didn't know this. Maternal suicide is the leading cause of death in the first post-delivery year. These women had half.
Okay, Stephen, that was
Let's change the subject now.
That study was refuted by a second study by the same people. I'm sorry to tell you.
COVID has cytokine storm associated with it. People are using ketamine to modulate the cytokine storm, which is so devastating in certain COVID patients. So we don't know what this drug, the boundaries of this drug are not yet discovered by a long shot.
So for further research, thank you.
And that part is absolutely true. And sometimes I think of ketamine as, similar to penicillin, similar to aspirin, that we continue to find, for those of us that, are interested and experiment and read different ways of using it. And, that, okay, so I'm treating a woman and I'm finding she's doing well, but at a certain time of month, her depression gets worse, despite that she's taking ketamine once a week or once every other week. And we learn from our patients. So we realized that one woman we worked with, she said, I realized that when I start getting my dysphoric PMS, it triggers a depression, and the depression can last for months, way beyond my cycle. So that's depression with, for females with PMS, with perimenopause, with menopause, with especially postpartum depression. So to be alive and knowledgeable about the different ways of being able to use it and populations is really important.
Thanks, Julane. Guys, I could probably keep going for the rest of the day chatting with all of you. Unfortunately, we got to get to closing. I'd like to get to closing remarks, if that's okay, if any of you would like to start. I guess no one else wants to close either.
I don't want to, but I'll say this was really a privilege. And I invite anyone who's been stimulated and feels that their concerns weren't addressed to send me an email. I'll try my best to get back to you.
Yeah, I know there were a lot of questions we did not get to, so we can always take a crack at answering many of them after.
Do you want to, Mark, do you want to take a shot at doing this again?
Yeah, if everyone's up for it, I think it would be great. We got to see if Deb's up for it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm always up for it. I mean, I could put pressure on you and get you all to commit to my next plan.
You've been so quiet. How
Right
do you like this?
now, which is a masterclass. Do you all solemnly commit to be a partake in a masterclass here in front of 218 people? Yeah, I'll let you continue, Mark, because I want everyone to just have their last words, and then I'll.
You know, you're all great, and I appreciate what each of you brings here, and I appreciate just the passion and the enthusiasm that each of you just totally exudes. And my take home note from this is just, you know, I've collaborated with each of you individually, and I just want to think about how we can do this, you know, more of the community. I like some of you mentioned today, and how we can, you know, and I thank Deb for bringing this together and creating this community for us. And thank you.
I wanted to just to thank you and Deb for putting this together, and everybody who came on today. You're right. This is community, what we're doing right now, and with all the people asking questions. Phil and I also have a ketamine group that we meet with twice a month, where we do consulting. We talk about how we're feeling, what's happening in the world, but also about our clients. And it's respectful and beautiful to take the time out, and it does. It takes a Saturday, you know, part of a Saturday twice a month, but it's so important. The one thing I also wanted to bring up that I know we didn't get to, but just for everybody who does this practice, it's in the field of access to care. You know, unless I missed that when I was taken offline there for a bit, but it's really important, and it'll be important for all emerging psychedelic psychotherapies, but also for ketamine, that the people who most need this work can least afford it. And that's people with PTSD, people who aren't functioning that well. And so therefore they can't pay the price. We're not shy about what we charge, because at least at our clinic, I mean, we spend 3 hours per patient, and we have to run a practice, but we also treat people who can't afford our fee. And that's done in various ways, just cutting fee. But we also have a program that we call Access to Care, that we have people, we have a nonprofit, and people have donated for that particular reason. So when people can't afford it, then we help them afford it by using money from this nonprofit. So I urge everybody out there to think about that, and to have that be part of how you practice in the world. Is, you know, if it's pro bono, whatever, that you also make this available to people who can't otherwise.
I would just add to that, we have within the framework for that is the Ketamine Research Foundation, and I urge you to go to it. We have a full library of all human studies accessible to all of you with ketamine, and a lot of things to look at. All I want to say for myself is I'm 77. I'm at the end of my span, and this is truly exciting work. I have great joy, like Stevens was talking about. I have great joy in the work and what's happening with people, though sometimes it's slogging it out. Most of the time, there are miracles that are occurring in my practice day by day that enhance the quality of my life and my sense of why I do this work. So I urge you all to be interested and get trained and really come on board with us.
Casey, Abid, any closing comments?
Sorry, go ahead, Abid. No, please.
I'll just piggyback a little bit off of what Julane said about access to care. I mean, I would strongly advise that anybody who's providing the service to make sure you're tracking outcome, because we need to speak the language of the insurance industry. And I've been in kind of doing that for a while now, and they need to see certain things. They don't talk to you until you present it in a way they can really understand and they want to see outcome and cost savings, basically. I mean, we prevent inpatient hospitalizations. I mean, there's a ripple effect of saving money for insurance companies, for society in general. So gather outcomes and minor outcomes, and then take the chance to try calling your insurance representative and your company and we try to get the coverage for people, for 100% coverage through insurances. Sometimes it works. We have a workman's comp patient who's got full coverage, but most of the time it doesn't, and it's frustrating. But I recommend it, the more people doing that, and we should find a way to collaborate together to try to really show the insurance companies that this is something they need to get on, and then make it covered and affordable, especially since FDA already approves Spravato a year or two ago. There's no reason why at this point other forms of ketamine and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy shouldn't be covered.
Crucial comments, brother. Thank you. Casey?
I mean, I think a lot of what needed to be said has already been said. So I just want to thank you, Mark, thank Deborah. It's been a real honor and a privilege to be part of this panel. Some people I really admire. I'll admire all the people, all of my co-panelists, and it's also a privilege to do this work. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm grateful for all of you for doing the work you do and helping people with severe mental illness. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just pick what Mark says, and I can see Mark's affected emotionally from this, and I can completely understand it. It's been an overwhelming discussion because all of you are so invested, and we could all feel it as attendees, the passion and the care. And thank you for being here. And thanks, Mark, for moderating so beautifully this discussion. As I said to all the attendees who I don't think we've ever had this many questions, I'm going to download all these questions, and I'm actually going to send it to all you guys and see what answers you can get back. And then we're going to mail it to them, because I mean, people really had a lot of questions. On that note, I want to thank again Ketamine Media for sponsoring tonight, and let everybody know that there will be a masterclass that PsyTech will be running with amazing teachers, and I'll let you all know when that's happening. And thank you, Mark, Phil, Stephen, Casey, Julane, and Abid. It was phenomenal. Everyone have a good day and good night, and we'll see you at the next PsyTech discussion.